G'day, Mike. Look, thanks so much for catching up with us today. I think it was maybe in the Mars Food Accelerator where you were with Fable Foods in the early days where we first came across each other. I was one of the mentors and facilitators there, and I fell in love with the story of Fable Foods, and then I learned about the preceding story of your previous startup. So thanks for coming along and joining us. Maybe just to help us set the position of your experience is you started this company called Shoes of Prey, which maybe not too many people have heard of, because you and your founders discovered a need for personalized footwear. So you can tell us a little bit more about that. But can you take us on the journey of where did that idea come from? Like, how did that business start?
Yep.
Where did that insight or that genesis of that idea come from?
Yeah, good to catch up, Cameron. The kind of thesis behind Shoes of Prey was that sort of women wanted to design their own shoes. So my co-founder Jody, whenever she would book holidays to Europe, she'd book stopovers in Hong Kong. There's these little stores in Hong Kong where you could design your own shoes, like sort of high heels, ballet flats, boots. And she would design shoes in that stopover. And then when she'd get back from her trip to Europe, she'd have all of these amazing shoes delivered, and people would be asking her, "Oh, where'd you get those shoes?" And because they were quite different and unique, and she'd be like, "Oh, I designed them myself." And then women would get really excited about that concept and that idea of designing their own shoes. So our sort of hypothesis behind Shoes of Prey was that there was a kind of scalable opportunity there. If we could take that concept that was done in these little stores in Hong Kong and roll that out into sort of an online sort of shoe design platform and e-commerce business, that there'd be an opportunity there. So that's sort of what we were looking to do.
Yeah, cool. And so I guess you had some evidence from somewhere else that this was a thing, that this was something that someone could do and something that someone wanted.
Yeah, so I was really talking to it was the conversations Jody was having with her friends, and then just talking to lots of people. So then pretty quickly, like my mum and sisters started doing it, and lots of our friends were doing it. People were asking Jody to design shoes for them, and we could just see that seemed to be that most of the women that we would talk to about this concept got really excited and passionate about the idea and wanted to try it themselves.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it makes me reflect on some reading I've done around the genesis of the Barbie toy, where Ruth, who invented it, she sort of was thinking about toys, and she went to Germany and she saw an adult toy, and she thought to herself, well, why don't children play with adult toys? They just play with baby toys. Right. And so she came back and then she designed an adult toy because of what she saw somewhere else.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how sometimes these new ideas actually aren't new ideas. It's just the recognition of a new idea that is already happening somewhere.
Yeah.
So you identified an idea. You identified that some people, some customers, some women were excited about this idea. You were hacking together a solution, just letting people know about how Jody was doing it. So what then happened for you to actually work out, well, is this a business? And how did you actually start that business?
Yeah, so this was back in 2009, so kind of earlier days of online retail and sort of fancier kind of web development. So we didn't initially, our plan was to build and we ultimately did build like an online shoe sort of platform designer, so you could design shoes on our website. But rather than incurring the cost of doing that, initially we just sort of had diagrams and images of the different components of the shoe, and we basically sent an email out to sort of 100 of our female friends and family and offered them the opportunity for sort of half the retail price that we were going to charge, the ability to kind of design their own shoes, and we had a really, really high take-up rate out of that group. Of that sort of 100 people we emailed, we probably had 30 or 40 of them actually pay money to design their own shoes. So that was kind of the initial sort of test. And then, that sort of tested out the partners that we were using for production, and allowed us to kind of test the concept and that what we thought there was a market opportunity. And then we went ahead and built the online shoe design platform and sort of grew the business from there.
Yeah, great. And so the business was pretty successful, really. I mean, you created a nice business. You had this platform. You had partners in different places that were actually doing the manufacturing. How did you discover, so you've got a successful business, how did you discover that this could be bigger, this might be bigger than what you could currently do? How did you just sort of discover what was needed to do? What did you need to do to actually make this a much bigger business?
Yeah, so we kind of grew the business. The first few years we grew it to about sort of $2 million a year revenue. And we were getting lots of customers coming to our website, designing shoes, saving them, and not buying. Like our conversion rates on our website were sub 1%, which is very low for an online retail business. And so we started talking to the customers that were buying, talking to the customers that weren't buying. And what we realized was we were performing well in 3 niches. So those niches were wedding and bridesmaid shoes, really creative women, and extended sizes. So we could do from size 2 to 15, narrow, wide, extra wide. So those 3 niches we were performing really well in, and we had high conversion rates amongst those customers. But there were all these other women coming to the site. They loved the idea, they're designing shoes and saving them, but not buying. And we realized in those conversations, those customers were more mass market fashion consumers and they weren't purchasing. So we started talking to them, well, you're obviously interested, but why are you not purchasing? And what they told us was, they love the idea of designing their own shoes, but they needed faster delivery times. Our lead times are about 5 weeks from when you ordered to receive your shoes, which is fine. People are planning that far ahead for their wedding shoes. If you're a size 3 shoe, you don't really have many other options, so you're happy to wait 5 weeks, and really creative women were happy to wait 5 weeks, so that was okay for those niches. But the mass market fashion consumer, she was often thinking about an event coming up, so she needed sub 2-week delivery times. Secondly, she wanted to design or shop a range of shoes, select a shoe and then edit it, whereas the design process that we had was a much more sort of free form. You almost start with a blank white template and design your shoes, and that worked well, particularly for that creative woman or people thinking about their wedding shoes, putting a lot of time into designing. But yeah, for the mass market customer, she wanted to shop like a normal e-commerce website and then modify the shoe. So we realized we'd have to change that. And then thirdly, the mass market fashion consumer didn't want to pay a premium. We were sort of charging a 20% premium for our shoes over the same quality shoes. And again, that worked for the niches, but not for the mass market consumer. So we knew we had to bring our price down. So we looked at those 3 things and we realized, okay, to execute on those things, we're going to need to build our own shoe factory because our manufacturing partners, we were kind of basically using the sample rooms in some shoe factories, so they weren't set up for scaling one at a time production, and there was no one in the world who did this. So we realized, okay, if we want to scale this, we're going to have to build a factory and develop all of the processes to scale one at a time shoe manufacturing. And then secondly, we're going to have to hire a bunch of, building the factory will allow us to bring the lead times down and reduce cost. And then to simplify the shoe design experience, we're going to have to hire some user experience product people and software engineers to build that out. So in order to do those 2 things, build the factory and hire the software engineering and user experience team, we're going to have to go and raise capital. So then we went out and raised some capital from that point.
Okay. So you had really good validation of the early adopters and innovators. They loved it.
Yep.
They were advocates of it. They were telling people about it.
Yep.
But then that chasm between those early adopters and innovators, there was the early majority, maybe late majority, just had a problem, and you talked to them, you understood what that problem was, and so then you went out and you raised a whole heap of money to solve that problem, built a factory in China, started manufacturing, had a better website. So you solved all those problems that the customer told you.
Yep.
And so then what happened?
Yeah, our sales grew, and they grew from sort of 2 million a year to about 10 million a year revenue. But they should, based on the number of people coming to the website, if the value proposition that we then built and created had have worked, we should have been at 50 or 100 million a year revenue, and we needed to be at about 30 to be at break even, and we were sort of stuck at 10. So we'd grown, but nowhere near enough. And then at that point, we'd built the value proposition out, so we could then go and watch that mass market fashion consumer and watch her behavior. And when we did that, what we realized was that mass market fashion consumer, she thinks she wants to design her own shoes. So that's what she consciously thinks she wants to do. But actually subconsciously, she actually wants to just buy what's popular on Instagram and fashion magazines that a designer has designed. She doesn't necessarily have the confidence that something she's designed is going to look good. She wants to see what a designer's designed and buy that. And she also doesn't necessarily have the time to sort of go through the process and build that confidence in her own design. So, but that's a subconscious thing. Consciously, she does think she wants to design. So if you ask her, which is what we did, she'll tell you that she wants to design her own shoes. But yeah, subconsciously, she doesn't want to. Your subconscious is more powerful than your conscious mind. So yeah, she wasn't actually ordering the shoes that she designed. And we only realized this once we'd built the value proposition and could watch her consumer behavior. So yeah, that was a massive error on our part.
Yeah. And I guess in reflection, knowing then what you know now, perhaps maybe you could have recognized that they were designing but not ordering, maybe going a bit deeper into trying to work out really what was going on, rather than just asking them.
Yeah. And there was confirmation bias in there, right? Like we thought, this was the whole hypothesis behind the business, that women wanted to design their own shoes. So when we went out and asked the mass market fashion consumer, all these women coming to our website, like, do you want to design your own shoes? What would make you do it? She said, yes, of course I want to. Here are the things that would make me do it. We were like, perfect. That's like our hypothesis. We're hearing the right answer. So yeah, total confirmation bias. Yeah, in hindsight, we should have gone and dug in deeper to actually really deeply understand the customer, what her motivations are in buying shoes. And had we done that, we probably could. That probably would have been a way to uncover that her actual subconscious desires were different to what she consciously wanted. And even better would be, and this was difficult for Shoes of Prey because no one else had built this value proposition, but I think an even better way to do this is to actually watch consumer behavior and then ask questions about what you've actually watched. Because if you watch consumer behavior, you can see their patterns. And this kind of thing happens a lot. Like if you ask people on the 1st of January, are you going to go to the gym this year? Heaps of people are going to say, yes, I'm going to go to the gym this year. But you actually go to gyms on the 1st of February and it's crickets in the gym. No one's at the gym. So, what people say they're going to do and what they actually do is very often different. So we made the error of not delving into that.
Yeah. And believing the customer.
Yeah.
And they weren't lying. They thought what they thought was true, but they were actually there was a restraining force that was stopping them from going to that, fulfilling that aspiration, that latent aspiration.
Yeah, exactly.
So just to put a round on that. So clearly you realised that it just wasn't going to scale. I know you tried lots of different things. You tried pivoting into other maybe categories and other things. But clearly, and I think you described it to my MBA class, it was a $40 million MBA, so you learned a whole heap, but it ultimately failed.
The UQ MBA is a little cheaper.
Not quite that. So you learned a whole heap. The business basically failed. You shut it down. And so now I just want to step into what happened then. So big experience. It looked like it was going to be, a great success, and then it wasn't. What happened to you, and then what led you into moving into the Fable sort of opportunity?
Yeah, so ultimately we had to close Shoes of Prey down. We sort of sold the factory, sold the brand, but for not that much money. So had to tell investors we weren't able to return their capital. Had to lay off 200 employees. That was a pretty challenging sort of 18 months or so that trying to pivot, fix the business, but ultimately not being able to do that. So I was pretty burnt out after that. So I took 6 months off. My wife and I moved. She's Danish. We went and lived in Denmark for the 6 months, and I just had a decompress and a break. I'd gone towards the end of the 6 months. I started thinking about what I wanted to do next, and I actively didn't want to start another business. I was feeling super burnt out of having done that before. The thought of starting another business, I literally felt ill thinking about it. But I was also thinking about the areas that I was interested in and might want to go and work in afterwards. So I'd gone vegetarian. I've been vegetarian now for 8 years. So that was probably, I'd been vegetarian for 3 years at this point, and gone vegan 3 years ago. And I was very passionate about wanting to help end industrial animal agriculture for all the same reasons I'm vegan, which is sort of ethics, environment, health, pandemic prevention. And so I'd sort of been thinking about ways I could contribute in that space. And I've tried convincing lots of people around me to turn vegan. And I think in 8 years I've been vegetarian, I've managed to convince 3 people to turn vegan. 2 of them work for Fable, so they don't really count. And the third I caught up with the other day, and he's back eating meat. So I'm a pretty terrible activist, but I could see out of those conversations, people get the reasons why, and they do want to reduce their meat consumption. It's just hard because meat from animals tastes great. And I didn't give up meat because I don't like the taste, like quite the opposite. I grew up in Queensland eating a lot of beef, and I miss the taste of meat, but gave it up for all those other reasons. Could see if you could give people the taste and texture of meat, make it out of something other than animals. That's an easier route to helping people either give up or at least reduce their meat consumption. And at the time, there were brands like Beyond and Impossible in the US that were sort of, on the up in this space. So I wanted to kind of go into the meat alternative space. So initially I tried looking for jobs in the space, but moved back to Australia, started talking to the startups in the space, but they were all like 2 or 3 person operations, and no one was hiring a washed up entrepreneur. Maybe if I'd been a chef or something like that, or a food scientist, there might have been opportunities, but there wasn't for my background. In the existing companies, I talked to Beyond and Impossible, but they weren't sort of ready to launch in Australia or high in Australia. So I started interviewing with other companies in other industries, and I also just wasn't passionate about those spaces. Like, I also felt physically ill at the thought of going and working back and doing something that I'd done previously, like being a lawyer or doing ad sales at Google or something like that. Just areas that I just wasn't necessarily passionate about. So I was kind of in this stuck spot where I didn't want to start another business, but I wanted to work in the meat alternative space, but there was no jobs. So I sort of tricked myself, I guess, in a way, and convinced myself, all right, go start a business in the space. In doing that, you'll go and meet anyone else in the industry you've not yet met, and maybe a job will come up, or maybe the business will go okay. So I think that kind of eased my way into it psychologically. So then, went and started Fable to help end industrial animal agriculture.
Great. So tell us a little bit about Fable and about, I guess, the context of Fable, but then what have you learned? What have you brought from your $40 million MBA into the Fable experience? Because it's a food business, plant-based food business, sort of same, but different to a fashion business. But what have you learned from that Shoes of Prey experience, and how have you taken those learnings into how you're approaching the Fable business?
Yeah, so I guess the biggest learning kind of just all centers around understanding the customer and the customer needs, the customer problem, and then looking at potential solutions to that. So rather than having a solution that's then trying to find a problem, doing it the other way around. So I spent a lot of time, the good thing about the meat alternative space is I could actually watch consumer behavior. So there were meat alternative products this was 2019, there were products on the shelf in Coles and Woolworths. So I would go into Coles and Woolworths and just stand at the meat alternative bay and just watch how consumers shopped the category. So I'd see which products they picked up off the shelf and put back on the shelf. They'd pick up another one, look at that product, put it back on the shelf, pick up a third one, look at that, put it in their shopping basket, and then I'd creepily go up to them and ask them, I was watching you. Why didn't you buy those two products, and why did you choose this one? And I was a little bit hesitant to do that at first. I thought people might think I'm a bit weird, but people were very happy to talk about their own kind of behavior. It was quite surprising and interesting. And yet, what I found as they were shopping the category was people were looking at the ingredient deck of the meat alternative products, and the products that they were probably about half the customers shopping the category were looking at the ingredient deck and looking for products that had a really clean, minimally processed ingredient deck, sort of had ingredients that they recognized, didn't have sort of any artificial ingredients or e-numbers or anything like that. And that sort of aligned with my own way that I eat a very minimally processed whole food based diet. And so I could see that there were lots of customers that had this exact problem and were behaving and shopping in a way that showed that they had this problem. And so then that set me out on the path of, okay, well, I want to do a really clean label, minimally processed, healthy meat alternative.
Yeah, great. So you've got this business based on a waste product, effectively, the stems from shiitake mushrooms. You've worked out how to process it in a way that makes it taste amazing, and it does. We might try some of it later, but so it tastes great. It's got a great texture. You've created a business which is doing really, really well here in Australia and also overseas. So how do you now sort of make sure that you are constantly innovating and developing in light of the needs of the customer, and making sure you actually keep that connection at a truthful level and a transparent level open?
Yeah, so we do a lot of market research and insights work. So as an example, we've launched into a lot of restaurants and restaurant chains, and we're finding some restaurants and restaurant chains with the product was performing really well, lots of people ordering it, and in other chains it wasn't performing as well, and we couldn't really understand why it was working in some places and not others. So we had a sort of hypothesis that it might have something to do with the menu naming and positioning, what the product's called on the menu. So we started running just a market stand at the Mount Gravatt markets here in Brisbane. We just set up a food stand, not branded Fable or anything, and we'd just serve up, offer food, and we'd test different names for the product. And we found some amazing differences between just what you name our product on a restaurant menu. So for example, in a Mexican restaurant, if you call the product pulled beef in inverted commas or plant-based beef, it sells really poorly. But if you call it shiitake carnitas, it'll sell 8 times better than if you've called it sort of pulled beef or plant-based meat. And so these massive stark differences in what gets people ordering the product. We also learnt that because the product's novel and unique, even if it's called Shiitake carnitas, people don't necessarily quite know what that's going to taste like. So doing in-restaurant sampling has a massive impact. People love the product when they taste it, but actually getting them over the hurdle of trying something new that they're unsure about, in-restaurant sampling can really help with that. Also pairing the product with a flavor profile that people know. So, for example, when we first launched into Guzman and Gomez, they launched a chimi shredded mushroom taco. So shredded mushroom, people are like unsure what that's going to taste like, and chimi, no one knew what chimi is as a flavor, and so the product didn't do that well. But we then launched into the Singapore restaurants with a Mexi Mayo pulled shiitake taco, and Mexi Mayo, people understand what that's going to taste like, and so the products performed much better. So a whole bunch of like really kind of detailed insights and learning. So we're kind of constantly talking to the customer, particularly watching customer behavior, testing different hypotheses to try and understand the psychology of the consumer and how we can help them to eat more of the product.
Yeah, great. And I love that focus on the psychology or the behavior, observing and I guess positioning and according to the nuance of what does the consumer really want. And in some ways, we talk a lot about reducing the risk of someone doing something new. And so reducing the risk is by making as much of it familiar as you can, which is what you've done with flavor or with positioning and just finally, Michael, I'd love you to talk to us about what have you learned about the scale up process to try and get new customers? Because you've said, not everyone wants to be a vegan. And so maybe ending animal agriculture is this long-term mission. I mean, Elon Musk has a long-term mission of getting rid of fossil fuels and he's making cars. So but I'm wondering, what have you learned just finally about how do you actually play that long game in terms of adapting and by no means compromising, but adapting your position in the marketplace to be able to have this long game of reducing animal agriculture, maybe not necessarily in the short term trying to eliminate it.
Yeah. So it's a good question. So from a kind of philosophical perspective, we actually have there's a philosopher, Peter Singer, who he wrote a book called Animal Liberation in 1974 that sort of laid the philosophical foundation for the vegan movement. And he's probably the world's most famous living philosopher. He's a friend and investor in Fable, and his sort of primary sort of philosophy around the things that he does is called consequential utilitarianism. So the utilitarianism, the idea behind that is it's the greatest good for the greatest number of conscious beings, and consequential utilitarianism is you should do things that have the consequence or the outcome that you're having the greatest positive impact on the most number of conscious beings. So or reducing harm to conscious beings. So we sort of take that philosophy and exactly sort of as your question's getting to, we're happy to do things that reduce meat consumption, even if it's not, perfectly, the answer to ending animal agriculture on its own. If it helps reduce meat consumption, it's reducing harm and suffering to animals, and it's sort of progressing along to the ultimate sort of end goal. So, for example, we've developed a new mushroom ingredient which is designed to be blended with beef. As a business, we won't sort of sell beef ourselves, but we'll sell this shiitake ingredient to beef processors who can then blend it in with beef. And the product, like a 50-50 shiitake mushroom beef burger, for example, we've blind taste tested hundreds of consumers, and it tastes 3/4 prefer it to the taste of beef. You get the sort of umami flavors of the mushrooms combined with the great flavors of beef. It's also cheaper than beef. So even if you forget all the health and environmental and ethical benefits, which are also there, people buy food on taste and price. And so if we want to reduce meat consumption, we've got to have products that taste better than meat and are cheaper than meat. And this is one way to do that. Obviously we want to do that with fully vegan products as well. And we aim to do that too. But yeah, someone can, instead of buying a 100% beef burger, can buy a 50-50 mushroom beef burger, and they're happy to do that because it tastes great and it's cheaper for them, then that's getting us kind of to the end result.
Yeah, that's great. And what I love about that is it's sort of, in some senses, it's what the early founders of the alt meat market, the big guys, Beyond and Impossible and V2, is that you've solved some of the problems that resulted in the challenges that they've faced, which is really exciting, massive growth, and then it's come down by 90+%. Because while some people are interested in maybe reducing their meat, they won't compromise on taste, they won't compromise on cost necessarily, and they really want a clean label. And so in some senses, by going through more of an organic approach, not launching with $1 billion business, but growing and you're learning as you're going and actually listening, you've actually solving the problems in situ as you're going, which sounds like a really great strategy.
Yeah. And I think like just the plant-based meat category as a whole, I think a lot of businesses just have this idea that, if we come up with this technology to make this product that looks and tastes along the lines of meat, consumers are going to want to eat it because it's better for the environment and it's healthier and it's more ethical. But actually what we've seen as a category is, as much as some consumers care about those things, people really just buy food on taste and price. They're the two most important things. And you can see that it's analogous to electric cars. People might want to have bought electric cars, but the Nissan Leaf years ago didn't sell that many cars. Whereas Tesla, Elon Musk came out with Tesla and made a car that was faster, cheaper to run, and cheaper to run. So it's a better car and cheaper, and that's what's got people now got the whole industry shifting towards electric cars. It's the same in renewable energy. Solar and wind is now cheaper than coal, and you get the same electricity, so you get the same product at the end, and it's only that's driving the switch to solar and wind power. So really, we've got to understand what the consumer wants and deliver products that align with what the consumer wants. And if we want to deliver products that are better for the world, better for the planet, better for health and everything, they've still got to beat the incumbent products on in our case, taste and price, like the core reasons that people buy food in the first place.
Awesome. Well, Mike, you've been very generous with your time. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to maybe trying some of your product in a minute with an interesting flavour sort of focus. But you've been really generous. I really appreciate your time and taking us through this story. And I hear you're heading off to the US soon to grow the business overseas. You've already got some sales in the US and really wish you all the best in that journey.
Yeah, thanks, Cameron. Appreciate it. Yeah, La Bodega here do an amazing Fable Birria taco. They're in East Brisbane, and we'll get to try it. I think this is one of the best executions of our product that I've had. It's really, really delicious.
Awesome. Great. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Thanks very much, Michael.
Thanks for having me, Cameron. Okay. Yeah, good to chat.